My parents called me the useless one, while my brother got a full ride to Harvard. At his graduation, Dad stood proud and declared he'd inherit everything: our family's $75 million business, a new Tesla, and the $13 million estate in New York. I kept quiet in the back row, pretending I didn't exist, until a stranger stepped forward, placed an envelope in my hand, and whispered something that changed everything. Before I tell you my complete story, subscribe and comment where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far this story travels. My name's Ethan Cole, and for most of my life, I was known as the mistake child. That's not something a parent ever says out loud, but you can feel it in the way they look at you. My older brother, Daniel, was the golden boy. Straight A student, captain of the debate team, accepted to Harvard before he even turned 18. Meanwhile, I was the quiet one who barely scraped by. We grew up in Westport, Connecticut, in a house that felt more like a museum than a home. Dad ran a multi-million-dollar construction company, Cole Developments, and Mom played the perfect suburban wife. Everything was polished: the cars, the smiles, the family photos. Everything except me. Daniel could do no wrong. He'd come home with a 98 on a test, and Mom would bake a cake. I'd come home with a 78, and Dad would take away my phone until I learned discipline. When people asked what I wanted to be, I'd say, I'm still figuring it out. And you could almost hear their pity. Even my parents had a phrase they liked to repeat at dinner. Not everyone's meant to be brilliant, some people just support the ones who are. I used to laugh it off, pretending it didn't sting. But when you hear something enough times, it starts to settle under your skin like rust. Daniel and I weren't close, though I tried. I helped him move into his dorm at Harvard, carried his boxes up 4 flights of stairs, and he barely said thanks. Mom hugged him for 10 minutes straight. Dad slipped him an envelope and said, "You'll need this for your future." When I asked if I could borrow the car to drive back home, Dad said, "Daniel needs it more right now." So, I took the bus, alone. For a long time, I convinced myself it was fine. Not everyone gets to be the favorite. But the truth was, being invisible hurts worse than being hated. Years passed. I stayed in Westport, working odd jobs, carpentry, landscaping, sometimes bookkeeping for small local businesses. Nothing fancy, but enough to get by. Meanwhile, Daniel's life was splashed across Christmas cards, Harvard honors, Wall Street internships, private jets. Every call from my parents began with, "You won't believe what your brother just achieved," and ended with, "You should really learn something from him." At some point, I stopped answering the phone. Still, part of me wanted to prove them wrong, not through money or status, but by showing I could build something on my own. So, I opened a small custom furniture business out of my garage. The first few months were rough, but I loved it. Would never judged you, it just reflected your patience. When I brought my first finished table to show Mom, she said, "That's nice, honey. You know, your brother's company just got featured in Forbes." That's when I realized, no matter what I did, I'd always be the afterthought. A few years later, I got an invitation in the mail, gold lettering, embossed seal. "You are cordially invited to Daniel Cole's Harvard graduation." I almost threw it out. But something made me pause. Maybe I needed to see it for myself, the life my parents always wanted. So, I went. The auditorium was packed. Daniel stood on stage, tall and confident in his gown, while Mom cried and Dad looked like he'd just been knighted. I sat 10 rows back, in the shadows, listening as the dean called his name. After the ceremony, Dad held a small family gathering at a rented hall near Cambridge. Waiters in white gloves, champagne, the works. When everyone was settled, Dad clinked his glass. "Tonight," he said, "we celebrate not just Daniel's graduation, but the future of the Cole legacy." Everyone applauded. I smiled politely, not sure why my stomach felt hollow. Then Dad turned toward Daniel. "Son, your mother and I have decided it's time you take the reins of our company. You'll inherit Cole Developments, and everything that comes with it." The crowd gasped. Mom beamed. Daniel nodded like he'd expected it all along. And, Dad added, "We're giving you the new Tesla, and of course, the New York mansion. It's time you had your own space." Laughter and applause echoed through the hall. Someone shouted, "You're one lucky man, Daniel." And me? I just sat there. Silent. Smiling like a stranger in someone else's life. When dinner ended, Mom came over and patted my shoulder. "Ethan, be proud of your brother. He's worked hard." I wanted to say, "So have I." But I didn't. Because deep down, I knew words wouldn't matter. As the room buzzed with toasts and laughter, I slipped outside for air. The night was cold, and the stars above Harvard Square shimmered faintly, like they were too far to care. That's when I heard footsteps behind me, slow, deliberate. I turned. A man in a dark coat stood there, holding an envelope. "Ethan Cole?" he asked. "Yes?" He handed me the envelope and leaned closer. "Your life's about to change," he whispered. And before I could speak, he disappeared into the crowd. I looked down at the envelope in my hand, no name, no return address. Just my initials, written in a script I didn't recognize. I stood there for a while, staring at that envelope like it was a live wire. People were still laughing inside, toasting to Daniel's bright future, while I was outside clutching something that suddenly felt heavier than paper. I slipped it into my jacket pocket and left without saying goodbye. When I got home to my small apartment, the kind where the kitchen is part of the living room, I sat at the table, the envelope still in my hand. It had no seal, no logo. Just EC written in neat, looping cursive. I hesitated before opening it, half expecting it to be some cruel joke. But when I tore it open, a single folded letter fell out. It read, "Ethan, if you're reading this, then the truth can no longer be hidden. Your father built his empire on someone else's back, yours. Meet me tomorrow at 10 a.m. at Willow Creek Cafe. Bring no one." There was no signature. I read it 3 times. The words made no sense. How could Dad have built his business on my back? I was barely a part of the company. I didn't even work there. Still, something about it felt right. Like it explained the unease I'd felt my whole life, the missing piece no one wanted to talk about. I barely slept that night. My mind kept looping through possibilities. Was this blackmail? A scam? Or was there something my family had buried long ago? By morning, curiosity had replaced fear. I drove to the cafe, a quiet spot just outside town. The place smelled like old wood and burnt espresso. A man was already sitting in the corner, facing the window. Late 60s, gray hair, weathered face. When I walked in, he looked up and nodded. "Ethan Cole," he said. "You look just like your mother did at your age." I froze. "Do I know you?" He gestured for me to sit. "You don't. But I knew your parents before you were born." I sat down, my pulse thudding in my ears. He slid a small folder across the table. Inside were a few old photographs and documents. One picture caught my eye, my dad, much younger, shaking hands with the same man now sitting in front of me. "Your father," he said, tapping the picture, "was my business partner. We built coal developments together 35 years ago. But it wasn't his idea, it was mine. The designs, the patents, the client connections, all of it." I blinked. "Then why does his name sit on every building?" He gave a bitter smile. "Because he took everything from me, including your mother." That hit like a punch. "What are you talking about?" He leaned back, eyes filled with a sadness I didn't understand. "Your mother and I were together before she met your father. We started that company side by side. But your father wanted control, and when he realized she was pregnant, he made her a deal. Marry him, let him take over the company, and he'd protect her reputation." She agreed. My breath caught. "You're saying?" He nodded slowly. "Ethan, I'm your biological father." The world went silent. The hum of the cafe, the clinking cups, everything blurred into nothing. I wanted to call him a liar. To deny it outright. But looking at him, the eyes, the jawline, it was like staring into a mirror 30 years ahead. He continued, voice soft. "Your mother wrote to me once after you were born. She said she couldn't risk your father finding out. He made her choose security or truth. And she chose security." I leaned back, trying to breathe. "Why now? Why tell me this after all these years?" "Because," he said, sliding another document toward me, "your father's empire, your supposed inheritance, legally belongs to you. Every design, every contract he used to build that business was stolen from me. But since I registered them in her name back then, your mother's name, they passed to you after she died." My mind spun. "You're saying I own coal developments?" "Legally," he said, "yes. Your father's been running your company under your nose." I stared at the papers, signatures, registration numbers, corporate seals. Everything lined up. My mother's name was on every one of them. "Why didn't you fight this earlier?" I asked. He sighed. "I tried. But your father had money, lawyers, and power. I had none. When I heard your mother passed last year, I realized there was only one person left who could make this right, you." I didn't know whether to feel anger or grief. My whole life, I'd been treated like the failure of the family, the dumb one. And all along, I'd been the one holding the real foundation of everything they worshipped. When I looked up, the man, my father, was watching me with quiet hope. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said. "I just want you to know the truth. What you do with it, is up to you." I sat there for a long time after he left, staring at the folder. The weight of every memory, every time my parents dismissed me, every cruel joke, came rushing back. I drove to the ocean after that. Parked near the cliffs, watching the tide roll in. My entire life had been built on lies, and suddenly, I was standing on top of the biggest one of all. When I got home that night, I opened my laptop and started digging. Public records, business filings, archived court cases, it all matched what he said. Every building, every project, every deal my father made, traced back to my mother's original designs. And then I found something else, a hidden account under my mother's name, worth millions. Unused. Untouched. I didn't sleep at all that night. Because for the first time, I wasn't just the forgotten son. I was the one holding the truth. And truth, when it's been buried long enough, has a way of becoming the most dangerous kind of revenge. I didn't rush into anything. For weeks, I sat with that folder, reading every page until I could recite the dates and signatures in my sleep. The more I learned, the heavier the truth became. Dad had built his empire on a foundation of theft and deceit, and every time he called me a disappointment, he'd been standing on something I rightfully owned. I didn't tell anyone. Not even my closest friend, Cal, who ran a hardware shop down the street and was the only person I really talked to. I knew that if I opened my mouth too soon, my father would bury the evidence before I even had a chance to breathe. So I started planning quietly. First, I went back through my mother's old belongings, boxes stored in the attic of my apartment building. Most of it was photos, letters, a few sketches. But at the bottom of one box, tucked inside a faded envelope, I found a note written in her handwriting. Ethan, if you're ever lost, remember, truth doesn't shout, it waits. It wasn't much, but it felt like a sign. I spent the next few weeks contacting lawyers. Most of them brushed me off, until one older man, James Rowan, agreed to meet. He'd worked in corporate law for over 40 years and had a reputation for taking cases others were too scared to touch. We met in a quiet office overlooking the harbor in New Haven. He read through my documents slowly, adjusting his glasses every few minutes. When he finally looked up, he said, "Ethan, if what you have here is genuine, and I believe it is, you're sitting on one of the biggest unclaimed ownership rights I've ever seen. So I can prove it?" I asked. He nodded. "But you'll need patience. Your father's lawyers are vicious. If we go after him publicly, they'll drag this out for years. But if we build quietly, one paper trail at a time, he won't even see it coming." I smiled for the first time in days. "Then let's do it quietly." Over the next few months, I lived a double life. By day, I was the same unremarkable Ethan Cole, fixing tables, taking small orders, living paycheck to paycheck. By night, I was digging through archives, scanning documents, and signing affidavits with Rowan's help. Piece by piece, we gathered enough proof to show that Cole Developments was legally under my mother's name, which had automatically transferred to me. We even uncovered old emails between my father and corporate partners, clear evidence that he'd manipulated the paperwork decades ago to erase her contributions. Every file I found felt like another layer of truth peeling away from the lie I'd grown up in. Then one day, I ran into Daniel. It was by chance, or maybe not. He was in town for a company event, stepping out of a sleek black car near our family's old office building. He spotted me across the street and waved, smiling that same effortless smile that had always earned him applause. "Ethan," he called out. "Man, it's been ages." I walked over, keeping my voice steady. "Yeah, it has." He looked good, expensive suit, clean watch, confidence that came from never having to question his worth. "So," he said, "still doing that furniture thing?" "Yeah," I said. "Still building things that last." He chuckled. "Good for you, little brother. We all have our paths." That line, "we all have our paths," hit me harder than I expected. Because for the first time, I realized just how blind he really was. He didn't know. None of them did. Not yet. A few weeks later, Rowan called. "Ethan, it's time. We have everything we need. The filings are clean, the ownership trail is verified, and the patents are confirmed under your name. All that's left is to serve notice." I stared out my window, thinking of my father's mansion, the company logo carved into every project, the legacy he'd guarded so fiercely. "Do it," I said. But before we filed anything, I wanted to give them a chance, one final moment to look me in the eye before their world shifted. So I sent out invitations. A small dinner, just family. I rented a private room at a local restaurant where we'd once celebrated Daniel's first big internship. When the night came, Mom was glowing, Dad was smug, and Daniel looked bored, scrolling through his phone. "Ethan," Mom said sweetly, "this was such a surprise. You never organize these things." "I know," I said, smiling. I thought it was time for something different. We ordered dinner. Conversation drifted to Daniel's company trips and new properties, while Dad talked about expanding into Europe. Then, as dessert was being served, I slid a folder onto the table. "What's this?" Dad asked, frowning. "Something you should see," I said calmly. He opened it, scanned the first page, then froze. His color drained almost instantly. Mom leaned over. What is it? But he didn't answer. Daniel took the papers next, reading faster than his father had. Wait, he said slowly. This says the company belongs to me, I finished. The silence that followed could have cut glass. Dad looked up, voice shaking with anger. Where did you get this? From the man who helped you build it, I said. And from the woman you buried in silence. Mom's fork clattered against her plate. Daniel's jaw tightened. You're bluffing, Dad said. Am I? I asked, sliding the legal certification toward him, notarized, verified, and filed that morning. By now, your lawyers have already received notice. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping the floor. You don't know what you're doing, boy. I met his eyes evenly. I know exactly what I'm doing. For the first time in my life, I watched my father, the man who once made me feel small, struggle for words. I didn't gloat. I didn't raise my voice. I just sat there, letting the silence speak for me. When I walked out of that restaurant, the night air felt different. Lighter. For years, I'd been their shadow. Now, I was the storm quietly moving in. But what I didn't know then, what none of us knew, was that my father wasn't going down without a fight. And the next move he made would shatter everything I thought I'd already uncovered. I woke up the next morning to chaos. My phone buzzed nonstop, calls, messages, alerts. The first voicemail was from Rowan, my lawyer. Ethan, your father's already filed a counterclaim. He's contesting ownership, saying your mother's signatures were forged. We need to meet. Now. I sat on the edge of my bed, heart pounding. So it had begun. Within hours, the story hit the business blogs. Cole Developments faces family feud over ownership. Reporters were circling like vultures. I avoided calls from unknown numbers and shut off social media entirely. Dad wasn't wasting time. He'd hired a high-profile law firm from Manhattan, the kind that charged more per hour than I made in a month. When I met Rowan that afternoon, he was already sifting through a stack of new filings. Your father's trying to bury you in paperwork, he said grimly. He's hoping you'll back down before this reaches court. I stared at the documents. Can he win? Rowan shook his head. Not if you stay calm. He's bluffing, trying to scare you. Still, the weight of it hit me. This wasn't just a business fight. This was family versus truth. The next few weeks were brutal. My father's team accused me of falsifying documents, manipulating my mother's estate, even forging her will. Every accusation cut deep, not because it might be true, but because it came from the man who'd raised me. Mom stayed silent through it all. She'd always been good at silence. Daniel, though, he called one evening. Ethan, he said, voice tense. Dad's losing it. He says you're trying to destroy the family name. I'm not destroying it, I said. I'm reclaiming what's mine. He hesitated. You can't just undo everything he built. Everything he built? I laughed bitterly. You mean everything Mom and someone else built? There was a long pause. What are you talking about? I realized then, Dad hadn't told him. Daniel didn't know the truth about me, about our mother, or about where it all began. I think you should ask him, I said quietly. But be ready, it won't be the answer you expect. I hung up before he could respond. 2 days later, I got a text from Daniel. Meet me at Dad's office. 6 p.m. Alone. I didn't trust it, but curiosity won. The Cole Developments building was eerily quiet that evening, after hours, the city outside glowing with sunset light. I stepped into Dad's office, and both he and Daniel were there, waiting. Dad stood behind his massive oak desk, arms crossed. Daniel sat nearby, his face unreadable. Sit down, Dad said. I stayed standing. So, he began, you think you've outsmarted me. You think you found a loophole, a way to steal what I built with my bare hands. I didn't flinch. It's not stealing when it was never yours. His eyes burned. You have no idea what you're dealing with. That company exists because I made sacrifices. I fought for it while your mother. While she what? I snapped. While she kept your secret? While she let you erase the man she loved, and the son you pretended wasn't his? The words froze him. Daniel's head jerked toward me. What did you just say? I turned to him. You heard me. Dad? Daniel's voice broke. What is he talking about? My father's silence said everything. When Daniel realized what I meant, he staggered back. You're saying, you're not. I'm not your full brother, I said softly. Mom had me before she married him. He covered it up. He built his company on someone else's work, and her silence. Daniel's eyes filled with disbelief. You're lying. I wish I was. He turned to our father, waiting for him to deny it. But the old man just looked away. That silence, it was the loudest confession of all. Get out, Dad finally growled. Both of you. Daniel stared at him, shaking his head. I can't believe this. He left first, slamming the door behind him. I followed, but before I reached the elevator, Dad's voice stopped me. "You think you've won, boy," he said. "But I've spent my life building walls. And you'll never climb high enough to tear them down." I turned back. "You're right. I'm not climbing them. I'm burning them." The next few weeks were a blur of hearings, press coverage, and whispers in boardrooms. But through it all, something unexpected happened. Daniel started showing up. Quietly at first, standing in the back of courtrooms, listening. He didn't speak to me, but he wasn't on Dad's side anymore either. Then one morning, he came to my workshop. He looked tired, older somehow. "I checked the files," he said. "You were right. About everything." I nodded, unsure what to say. He ran a hand through his hair. "You know, I used to think Dad was invincible. But now I realize he was just scared of anyone seeing through the shine." We stood there in silence. For the first time in our lives, there was no competition between us, just the shared weight of truth. Then he handed me something. A flash drive. "I found this in his private files," he said. "It's everything, contracts, letters, even the payments he made to keep people quiet." I stared at it. "Why give this to me?" "Because I'm done pretending," he said simply. "And because you deserve what he never gave either of us, respect." He left without another word. I plugged in the drive that night. The files were enough to end my father's career, his legacy, everything he'd spent decades building. But I didn't send them to the press. Not yet. Because somewhere inside me, a voice whispered, "You can destroy him, or you can free yourself." And maybe, just maybe, those two weren't the same thing. 3 weeks passed before I made my decision. I'd been staring at that flash drive every night, the faint blue light blinking like a heartbeat. Inside it lay everything, evidence that could end my father's empire and expose the truth the world never saw. But revenge, I'd learned, doesn't always heal. Sometimes, it just keeps the wound open longer. Instead of sending the files to the media, I sent them to the board of Cole Developments, privately. No fanfare, no headlines, no gloating. Just truth. Within days, whispers spread through the company halls. Senior members began resigning quietly. Investigations followed, quiet but thorough. I didn't attend the hearings. I didn't need to. I'd already lived through enough battles. Then, one gray morning, I got a message from Rowan. "It's done. The board removed him. Effective immediately." I read the words twice before it truly hit me. My father was out. Not by scandal, not by fire, but by the quiet force of truth catching up. I didn't cheer. I just sat there in my small workshop, the same place where all of this began, and let out a breath I'd been holding for years. A week later, Daniel called. "Dad's leaving the city," he said. "Stepping down from everything." "Where's he going?" "Doesn't say. Somewhere near Lake Michigan, I think. A cabin, maybe." I didn't respond. Daniel hesitated. "He asked about you." "Let him wonder," I said softly. There was a pause. Then Daniel said, "You know, you could have destroyed him completely. But you didn't." "Why?" I smiled faintly. "Because destruction isn't the same as justice." He didn't say anything for a while, then finally, "Mom would have been proud of that." That hit deeper than I expected. 2 months later, I received a letter. No return address. Just my name, written in shaky handwriting I knew too well. Inside was a single page. "Ethan, I don't expect forgiveness. I only want you to know, I was never angry that you found out. I was angry that I couldn't live with the truth myself. I built everything to prove I could be more than a mistake. Turns out, the only mistake was not being your father in the ways that mattered. M. Cole." For the first time in my life, I saw my father not as the giant who towered over me, but as a man who'd been running from his own shadow. I folded the letter, placed it in the drawer next to Mom's photo, and whispered, "I forgive you. But I won't forget." In the months that followed, Cole Developments transformed under new leadership. The company redirected part of its funds into renewable housing projects, a vision my mother had once drafted but never got to complete. Daniel became part of that shift, rebuilding with honesty this time. He invited me to join, and after a long silence, I said yes. Not for Dad. Not even for the company. But for Mom, for the legacy that should have been hers all along. One late afternoon, I visited the old family cabin, the same one my parents had bought decades ago when things were still simple. The lake shimmered under the fading sun. Wind moved through the pine trees like a sigh. I stood there, watching the water, and realized something I hadn't before. Sometimes, justice isn't about winning. It's about ending the story in peace. And peace isn't something you find. It's something you make. I knelt down by the edge of the water, tossed a small wooden carving into the lake, the first one I'd ever made, back when Mom taught me how to shape wood into something beautiful. It floated for a moment, then sank gently beneath the surface. Just like the past. When I walked back to my truck, I felt lighter than I had in years. The headlines, the lawsuits, the secrets, they all belonged to another lifetime now. And as the road stretched out ahead of me, I finally understood. You can't rewrite the people who hurt you. But you can choose how the story ends. Mine didn't end with vengeance. It ended with freedom. And maybe that was the real revenge after all. If this story moved you, remember, truth might break families, but it also rebuilds hearts. Like and subscribe for more stories. Thank you for watching.